haven't looked to see how long it's been since I've done a full yard video tour, but it has been a while. Lots changed. First of all, behind me, you might see the biggest change there between me and the carport. I've converted a bunch of the driveway into garden space. That was an early spring project that happened in April and May. And you might also notice that in the back there. I'm getting a new roof put on. Anyway, here goes for the tour. As always, I start in the front. The entrance to my driveway, these two little planting beds here on either side. They're a little bit different every year. This is one of my two fragrant Daphnes, Daphne odora, and it's doing okay. I have to water it. Here you can see I got the sprinkler there, it's on a timer. And then I started a bunch of this salvia, rose queen, woodland salvia, woodland sage, from seed earlier this year, and didn't know where I was going to put it, and there it went. And on this side, these took a long time to get going here. This impatiens, which I think finally eventually took off when I started fertilizing it. So the soil is on the left and right side of the driveway here are still pretty gravelly, pretty free of nutrients. This fuchsia here was about 3 feet tall last year, rose to the ground and just barely came back and hasn't even fully bloomed yet. Those are the very first buds. And these two tuberous begonias survived the winter in their pot. Sprouted back and are quite nice. There's the third one in there, it was too crowded anyway. And then in the back there is an Anise hyssop volunteer. So here's another one of the big changes was this section right here. Maybe the last video will show there was a row of American sumac here, an eastern North American species, and it was always very aggressive, sending out suckers. I wanted to replace it with some native plants, namely the Scowler's willow, which was a tiny little twig when I planted it here this spring. It grew a lot, but it needed some extra water this year, and I dug it into a hole. The sumac, I think I dug up about 6 or 7 stumps all along the base of the fence here. Oh, and built a new fence as well. And then I stuck in some other native plants. This is the California figwort. There is a Colomia down here, which is dormant this time of year. This is Oregon Sunshine, a great native composite, yellow flowers. This one didn't bloom this year, it will be nice next year. And then some volunteer sunflowers planted by the birds. Out of these two, I started from seed. I just stuck 3 seed in here. This is a variety called Arikura. The one in behind actually got a little bit taller, about 10.5 feet. This one got to be 10 feet. Produced this unbelievably gigantic head of flowers, and it still has some seeds in there. A lot of them aren't fertile. I tied them up to keep them more or less vertical, but it has actually needed it flopping over into the neighbor's yard. Anyway, I'm very pleased, but the sumac has been extremely aggressive all summer long, putting up suckers, trying to reestablish itself from the bits of roots left. And so constantly down here, pulling it up. Here's some rootlet going all the way back, and it's been really aggressive in my neighbor's side too. Anyway, let's talk about the new project here. So it was just 12 feet wide by 15 feet wide by 25 feet long between here and the carport. I had some guys with a backhoe come in and dig out 12 inches deep. It's this great big square rectangle. Then I had a huge load of dirt brought in, sort of, I forget what it's called, but it's river sand and loam, but nothing organic in it. Some clay mixed in. And I had to haul that all throughout here by wheelbarrow. It was soaking wet. This was in mid-April. And then I had a top layer of planting soil put on top of that. Then I had to dig a trench through here, lay it with sand, so I had a load of sand delivered as well. Leveled it, measured it, and brought in these pavers one by one by hand to make this walkway. And what did I plant in here? Well, this Indian plum was always there, but that's in the border I didn't have dug out. I transplanted my rose. I transplanted several of the chrysanthemums I had around the yard. There's a couple there, they haven't bloomed yet. Oh, I planted some native plants back in here. There's a Ceanothus cuneatus right there. And then a semi-native is what's back in there? There's a manzanita, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's a very low, dense shrub. It's not getting much light now because of the cosmos. Well, the cosmos and the marigolds were all seeds that I just stuck in the ground. It was a bare open spot here, and I just put a seed here and a seed there. The cosmos is mostly done, as you can see, but it's full of goldfinches, both Leicester and American, who love the seeds. But those are the things that you mostly see in the garden right now, are these marigolds and cosmos, because they just grow so fast, get so big. But they're all annuals. They will be gone. This will be a much more barren place. And then these two things here is Jimson weed, datura, which was seed that came in the dirt that was hauled in. I recognized the seedlings when they were young, but since I had fertilized, put a layer of organic fertilizer on top of the mineral soil, they grew much bigger than they normally would. Normally they get only about knee high, and these are a good 5.5 feet tall. And I've been snipping the fruits off so they might continue blooming into the fall. Not a great host for insects, but white-lined sphinx did feed from the flowers. And there's been an interesting little leaf mining fly that used the leaves. I also dug up some perennials from here and there throughout the yard, natives and semi-natives, and filled in some spaces. There's the native roamer's fescue, there's the showy aster. Back there you can see the sort of heart or kidney-shaped leaves, lobed leaves of a checker mallow. Here's another Oregon sunshine, another checker mallow. Oh, I dug up little tiny seedlings of the Viola edunca, planted them back in there, and they took off really nicely all summer. I transplanted a yarrow out here, which is a weedy-like perennial, but very, very nice for pollinators. Cosmos, Coreopsis came from around the yard. Black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia, daisies volunteer throughout the yard, and I just dug them up elsewhere and put them out here. This is a Stachys hedge nettle or horse mint, and hummingbirds and bees really like it. It's a nice minty smell. Another native Colomia that I put in there. This is a native goldenrod, and there's the non-native goldenrod that was already in the yard. It was one plant and now is about 4 plants around the yard. It even reseeded itself in one spot behind me. There's a different species, or at least variety of goldenrod that was snuck into a plant order at Doak Creek Nursery, Native Plant Nursery. And then the really big red flowering currant that's over there in the new planting area used to be here, somewhere in the middle of this walkway. So I designed this walkway just like the other one, different sized pavers, and I had to use a little bit of trigonometry to figure out the arc, how wide to space them on the outside. But I'm very pleased with how it turned out. It was a lot of work. And then to finish it off, I bought these 3 volcanic rocks which have little nooks. I put this non-native sedum in. Anyway, that's the new driveway area. You can see all the roofing material stored here. Hopefully it'll be done in about 2 or 3 days. It's the part of the yard I call the oak meadow. It's where I first started putting in native plants, but quite a few more in recently. Some of the originals were the big native lupin, Lupinus macrophyllum, and the roamer's fescue, which is a short-lived grass but reseeds nicely. I planted this serviceberry quite early on as well, and one of the successes from it, it survived a really nasty bout of rust last year. We had a different spring, and then it has two seedlings that have come up at the base of it, and that I will eventually dig up and put elsewhere in the yard. And then, of course, the twinberry honeysuckle, Oregon grape, the tough leaf iris, and then Oregon white oak, which was a gift from my neighbors. So those were the originals, but I have since put in 3 more species of native grass: California oak grass, June grass, and tufted hair grass, which is over there. There's the native flax, some more of the checker mallows, which I'm just spreading around the yard. This is Idaho blue-eyed grass, a type of iris. Another Oregon sunshine, which did bloom. And last but not least, over in here is this narrowleaf milkweed, one of the 2 native species of milkweed in the Willamette Valley. This Siberian wallflower is semi-native at least, and came in a seed mix. And then I have some non-natives around here as well, such as this cultivar of a goldenrod that I had divided from elsewhere in the yard, and the same Stachys, which is again wonderful for hummingbirds and bees, and the black-eyed Susan daisies, and even one of the chrysanthemums I put over in here. The California lilac or blue blossom ceanothus has gotten huge, but it's one of the prize pollinators in the spring for bees, flies, wasps, and especially these longhorn beetles. So I'm enjoying the fact that it's continuing to grow and fill in and claim its own space in the yard. This here was the perennial circle here with mostly non-native but pollinator-friendly plants, and there's still some non-natives in here, such as that lilac down there, and I'm also growing some minor food plants here, such as this epazote, Mexican herb, and I grew peppers here last year. This is a volunteer. Just let it grow to see what would happen. But this big shrub here is 9-bark. Its neighbor here is ocean spray, 2 fabulous natives. This is one of my favorites. Here is a showy milkweed. Started as one tiny little, almost invisible rootlet in a pot, and it blooms nicely now, and it's had on quite a few of these fruits. One of them just opened the other day. Here, this one here showing its seeds. Warm and dry. And then food plants. I planted these green bean vortex, and they are continuing to produce huge amounts. I only put 9 plants in. 2 of them I think died, so there's maybe just 7 plants here, providing far more than I can possibly eat. The other food plants in here were the red currant here, and then in behind, black currant. That's the hybrid of the 2 native species of Spirea. And then another salvia. This is an annual type, at least in this climate, called coral nymph. And hummingbirds really like it. By the way, it filled in that spot. I'm not sure I'll ever grow it again, however. This is the one native Ceanothus cuneatus, the buckbrush that I originally planted here my first spring. It's still alive, and it looks very, very nice. Let's see. Okay, so this part of the yard was more non-natives and non-pollinator friendly plants, And I'm just gradually changing that over to more natives. First step, well, the first step was I planted because I had this twinberry honeysuckle here, which is showing some drought stress, but it's normal this time of year. It actually responds to some extra watering I gave it a couple of months ago, is blooming. So what I took out were almost all of the non-native irises, which were Siberian or Japanese type irises, the oriental poppies, and the peonies. And there was already this salvia here, and my little herb section over here of culinary sage and oregano and French sorrel, and in the pot I have marjoram. And there's some scabiosa down here. I got rid of the liatris. Already native in the garden were these two kinds of checker mallow. There's one over here, rose checker mallow, and then meadow checker mallows over here. And I also planted these wild bergamot here, which is the #1 bumblebee plant. It's been done for about a month. Now the goldfinches are going to feed from it all winter long. But after having removed all those peonies and irises, I had this big open space here, just in the right time to plant some corn. So I stuck in 22 corn seeds. This is Cafe F1 hybrid, super delicious, not too sweet, full of corn flavor. And then my neighbor Lisa had started lemon cucumbers from seed and had 2 extra plants. So she gave me 2 extra plants. One is there and one is there, but you can't tell that the way they've grown up into the corn and up the bird feeder, into the monarda, buried this coneflower here. And I've probably gotten somewhere around close to 30-40 pounds more, maybe 50 pounds of cucumbers off of this plant. And it'll all soon be coming out. It's still putting on plenty of cucumbers. I got some in there I need to pick. It's an everyday. Oh, there's a huge one there. I just picked a bunch. There's even an ear of corn there that might have something edible on it. Anyway, so that's what's going on in this area. Once these are all out and these mostly volunteer sunflowers are done with, the birds are done with them, I'll have to decide what sort of natives to put in here. One totally non-native that it seems to be harmless, doesn't take up much space, is this tiger iris, Agridia. And there's one blooming right today, maybe the last one of the year. Each flower lasts just a day. Back to the main central perennial bed, which isn't a perennial bed anymore. I'm at the southern end of it here, and all around on this south end and over into here last year I grew vegetables. I had early on Walla Walla sweets growing in here, and then had some ground cherries and several kinds of peppers growing throughout in here. So it was bare all winter long. In the very early spring I scattered a wildflower quote-unquote mix, seed mix that had been given to me, and covered it with a layer of compost, and it grew up nice and thick and lush. Most of the things that were in it were these silly little zinnias of various colors, and filled in with lots of nasturtiums and hollyhocks. There are also some non-native lupin, phlox, and columbine in it. I planted some of the same mix over in here, and you see the hollyhock there. More or less pretty useless, pretty low maintenance. The problem was that it also covered up all the areas where weeds were growing, and so there were a ton of yarrow and other weed seeds that were in the compost mix that I put on top. So it was about time to get rid of it all. Left me with this open space, so this is where I planted some leeks. These were a pot that I bought at the store of a bunch of seedlings. Dug 2 trenches about 5 inches deep, planted them in the trench, Waited about 2.5 weeks while I was gone, had them on timers, and by mid-December I should be able to pull up some delicious leeks for braising and soups. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I'm obviously going to have to get rid of the zinnia. Sunflowers will go. I'll put in some native perennials perhaps. The Fuji tree is loaded this year. Some of the apples look really nice. Others are full of worms, but I didn't get around to thinning it as much as I should have. There's a lot of native stuff that goes on under here. Lots of native columbine and iris, and there's a snowberry back in there. But it all gets pretty quiet during the summer, very dry and very shaded. This red flowering currant is always the first one to bloom in the spring, and it has very powdery blue fruits, unlike the other 5 I have in the yard. Just individual variation. Back in here, I planted some shooting stars this spring, which immediately went dormant. There's also a checker lily in there. We'll see if they come up. There's some native viola, there's some native filbert. That was a cow parsnip, native cow parsnip that came up from seed I scattered about 2 years ago, and to the right of it there's a meadow rue that's native. So this is largely native stuff in here, and that will hopefully spread over into this area here. I'll let this lupin and columbine bloom next year. There's a lot of weeds in there too, a little mint. My 2 rhubarb plants are much happier here than where they were under the willow over there. And I planted this next to the bird bath. This is a hybrid Lobelia cardinalis. That's great for hummingbirds, but the bird bath didn't actually overflow. Since I have a drip of a timer and water just goes into the ground. It wasn't placed well, and this wasn't actually getting much water all summer, so it was stunted until about 2 months ago. Finally changed things. I've already cleaned this all out here. This is mostly the blueberry patch, blueberries, the sunchokes, which are huge this year, about 12 feet tall, and spearmint. But I had planted some Nicotiana alata back in here, and it's a perennial. It feels in nicely and adds some nice evening scent. These sunflowers are just volunteers from the bird feeder. I had a great crop from my Chandler blueberry this year. Very few from the 6 dukes that are planted around here, but they haven't been very well exposed to sun. There's 3 dukes here, and there's 3 dukes over here. Now the red flowering currant, which put on very few fruits this year. Here's a stray Jerusalem artichoke that probably came from one little tiny round tuber. And I will be getting rid of this red, I forget what it's called, crocosmia. It was fine. Hummingbirds do feed from it, but it's otherwise useless. The volunteer tomato, cherry tomato from what I grew last year. And I think that's pretty much it for the front yard. So the backyard, I did a tour of the raised beds a little while ago, and I was going to do the rest of the yard the very next day, but that never happened. Of course, a lot has happened in the raised beds since then, and there's also the rest of the backyard. So let me cover that pretty quickly. My brush pile. Birds love the brush pile. Unfortunately, so do rats. But it's a great place to concentrate the rat trapping, which is a constant. So, and what really helps my brush pile become a nice thicket is the neighbor's hardy kiwi growing on a trellis. I planted these Grandpa Ott's marigold, morning glory in seed all around the base of this a couple of years ago, and now it comes back and covers up a bunch of the brush pile during the summer when there aren't as many birds. This was my baby butter squash, and I got 6 ripe ones, and then there's 4 more here that aren't quite ripe, that may ripen in the next month depending on how sunny it is. Butternut squash. This is my little native patch of Douglas's aster, which did okay this year. Twinberry honeysuckle, which is very drought distressed. Same with the red flowering currant. And then back in here I tried planting squash. Large winter squash didn't work. However, the cucumbers, put on far more cucumbers on 6 little plants, no 4 little plants that I ever imagined. So I got a bunch of pickles fermenting in the fridge right now. And this is all borage, planted to attract honeybees, to attract pollinators to the squash and cucumbers. This is our non-native Himalayan blackberry, and my neighbors and I keep it well curated, pruned, trim it way down in the winter. We don't let it root at the tips and form a big thicket. So all these really long canes will either come off or will be trained like I did that one on the trellis. And all the old canes from last year, the flora canes back here, will be pruned off. Before I get to the raised beds, let me just go over what's going on here. I had 6 artichoke plants this year. That was way too many. So I got rid of the 2 in the front yard, and I got rid of the one that was right here that wasn't doing so well. And these will be my 3 artichoke plants next year. Here's some of that same woodland sage, rose queen, that I planted in the front of the gate. And these were pots of pansies that I did in the spring that bloomed all summer long. It's my long-lasting marjoram that's been here for all 4 years now. This is the red flowering currant that was first uprooted by a mole that tunneled underneath it. Struggled, and then I stepped on it, snapped it off, and it struggled. And then last year it put on a huge amount of growth. Almost all this growth is last year, and then it bloomed white this year. And this is was a very popular plant for hummingbirds and warblers. It shows drought stress, all the dead leaves, but look at all these new buds. So it's very, very alive and very happy, and will be fine next year. In this pot was a very unhappy rocoto pepper from seed that I brought back from Peru. And maybe they don't like to have their roots bound. It's got plenty of water. I think it had plenty of nutrients. Don't know. It bloomed much earlier than the one I put into the raised bed, but it never set on fruit. All the flowers dropped. It's a very finicky pepper. These are my chives that I've had for years in this pot, and lemon and rose scented geraniums over here survived several hard winter freezes without being brought in, which is amazing. They died to the ground. And this was the pot that had the gardenia, which did die. So I put in this coral nymph salvia, which bees and hummingbirds like, and also a spearmint that started from seed. So here's this Grandpa Ott's morning glory again, and this was a single volunteer, little tiny plant that came up out of the base of the ground here. So I stuck this trellis on top of it, trained the 3 or 4 stems that went about halfway up, and then ignored it. And it did this, and it went up into the dead plum tree, which I'm leaving for the woodpeckers and insects. And it's actually just a perfect little spot for it. Here's my paver raised bed, which I hope to get some strawberries out eventually. The strawberries did not fare so well this summer, maybe shaded out too much. I had volunteer dill grow up in here. I planted some celery, and that's what this is. The celery never did put on roots, so I utilized the stems to make soup, and I'm letting this one bloom to see if I can get some seed from it. I also planted this partially from seed, and it's been the best. These are full of water because it's been raining. There's some spring onions and Walla Walla sweets here. They're going to go into one of the raised beds. I need to dump the water out of those, however. And I did not cover last time this back bed here, which is just an unbelievable jungle right now. Hard to explain what went on here. I had moved some perennials over here, so you can see the dark purple Salvia guaranitica and this aster or fleabane. There is something else in here. I see a big weed. Oh, there's a coreopsis. Here it is. It's this sort of pale coreopsis, which sometimes shows pink at the base of the petals on the ray flowers. And then back in there is a struggling Monarda didyma, the red flowering Monarda that's so loved by hummingbirds. But then I had this huge open space here and a supposed mix of hummingbird flowers, which the seeds included nasturtium, this tall zinnia, and back there that scarlet runner bean. Well, I do see hummingbirds occasionally visit the nasturtiums, but they're not all red like the packet said. Hummingbirds ignore the zinnias. Maybe the red flower attracts the hummingbirds, but I think the hummingbirds prefer the hummingbird feeder over zinnias. But to add to it, I started from seed a smaller zinnia in a separate packet that's also red, and a much prettier red and more interesting to pollinators perhaps. And this red salvia, which is filled in nicely in between. So there's actually a row of the tall zinnias, a row of the red salvia, a row of the short red zinnia, and then a row of only about 6 nasturtiums. Totally insane how it's completely filled in. Things have flopped over through one another. You can barely even see the other zinnias now. But the hummingbirds do like the salvias and the scarlet runner bean. This is another episote which has come back from the roots for a 3rd year. I see black nightshade, which needs to come out before it throws seed. And then I planted my 2 Raven F1 zucchinis here, and they just got enormous. And now there's a great big zucchini that needs to be picked back in there. I can't imagine how much zucchini I've got from these things, but it's just way too much. And they've gotten way too big. I used to walk through here. This is where I walk through. I planted that zucchini over there because that's where I wanted that zucchini, but it has a trunk which trails along the ground. So I'm now wondering if one can actually grow zucchini vertically. Stick a really strong pole in the ground and keep tying it up as it gets bigger and bigger. It's a very heavy plant. And the same deal on this side. This is where I'd walk through, right through here, between the raised bed and the red flowering currant. And I planted that zucchini over there because that's where I wanted it. And now it's way over here. It even has a couple of fruits that need to be harvested. Okay, this area over here is actually the raspberry trellis, and I got rid of last year's black caps, and these are the black cap raspberries growing here. I tied up the primocanes to this post, and they're going incredibly long, and they're going to hit the ground and send roots into the ground, which I don't want. So I'm going to try to keep them off the ground, maybe trim the tips, and then sometime in the middle of winter take them off that pole and train them on the trellis here. And growing completely differently is the red raspberry, which last year I cut all the way to the ground in the winter, and then that meant I did not get a flush of flowers off of last year's growth in May and June, and fruits then in June. Instead, I just didn't get fruits until August or so this year, and it's been going super strong. One of the troubles has been the clearwing moth, which lays its eggs on the stems, bores through the base, and kills the whole cane. So I've pulled out about 20 or 30 canes, and I still have more raspberries than I know what to do with, and they're super, super yummy. And they're going to put on until the first hard freezes as well. There's the black cat raspberry. So my raised beds are pretty much done. This is going to become the onions seedlings that I showed earlier, but currently it has some still harvestable jalapenos and maybe a few Oregon spring tomatoes. Pull those up this week. This is the Santa Maria Pinquito bean patch, which totally surprised me by how tall it grew, and it's put on tons of pods, and I'm pretty sure that most of these are far enough along, or a good number, that they'll not rot in the fall rains that just started this weekend. So I planted only 50 beans in here, and you can see probably more than 100 beans right in that shot there. And there's a whole bunch of it back in here. It's like a jungle, and it's flopped over too. I didn't try to keep these too vertical. So back in this raised bed, I had some basil and pink Berkeley tie-dye tomato, my black plum, one of my favorite tomatoes. I will grow that again. And these are my ancho peppers. I will these continue turning red and dry them. I've already made 2 big batches. That's 8 half-cup servings of Thai green curry paste from this Ascent pepper. I think I have 1 more bell pepper coming on. That's it for my bell peppers. They can come up, and then I can weed out the mullein, and the Kochiana Volunteer, the mint, and thin out my lettuce. I planted lettuce here about a month ago. Just threw some seed in. This is where I planted one of my 6 Brussels sprouts. I have some endive growing in here, but lots of weeds. I need to pull out lots of the weeds. This is the California figwort, and there's apple mint, all from the compost. Over here, oh my, I pulled up already the Napoli melon cantaloupe that was here, Napoli. And this is the orange silverware honeydew, which may or may not ripen. Oh, and here's the other rocoto. Maybe I won't go the other side, but it's gotten big, and it seems to be thinking about setting on fruit. So I'm wondering if maybe that just likes the shorter day length. This is one of my 2 black Krim tomatoes. I think this one's done. I don't think I'm going to get any more ripe ones off of that. Here's some purple basil, some Thai basil for making curry. Here's another one of the Brussels sprouts that I grew. Totally attacked by cabbage white butterflies. Oh, here's a spotted cucumber beetle. I have some parsnips sown here and some parsley root sown here as well. I need to thin out some of them and weed out the spurge. This handsome devil is the Malagueta pepper from Mato Grosso, Brazil. Beautiful red peppers. Another Brussels sprout. And here, oh my, rocoto is almost about 6 feet tall now. Well, it's growing in 2 feet higher than the ground level. So yeah, it's a good 4 foot tall plant. And yeah, I see more and more evidence that there might be some rocoto peppers in the future. We'll see. These were 2 Acina melons. There might be a ripe one coming on over there. They're big and delicious. Another Brussels sprout. And 3 kinds of carrots that I grew here. No, 4 kinds of carrots. 4 rows of carrots. That will supply me with carrots all winter long. The shishito peppers have been incredibly prolific and delicious. Sun gold tomato, definitely something to grow again. Oh, I planted sowed some lettuce in between here. Maybe when I pull these shishitos up, it will fill in. This parsley, I started from seed. It never went to seed. It's time to, I think, cut it out. I've been very pleased with the Listada de Gandia. Some of them I need to pick, they're probably overripe. And they're not too bad when they're small. These eggplants are great. This is my Peruvian ají pepper, and it is now loaded with peppers. There's 1 ripe red one over there, a couple of them, and lots of green ones. Long seasoned peppers. And here, this is another black Krim, a delicious tasting tomato. Black Krim and black plum are my favorites. And there's one last 6th Brussels sprout, and I also put some kohlrabi back in here. They might not be getting enough sun with all these other vegetables in the foreground, but we'll see. Oh, that looks like a ripe. I was just reaching down to pick up one of my sugar cube melons, but it's actually gone bad. Maybe there might be some good flesh to nibble on over here, but something happened to it. But sugar cube was my favorite melon this year. Small, so a nice decent size, and super sweet and tasty. Anyway, I think that's pretty much it for my rice beds.